Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's nice to see all kinds of faces here today. We have a few more straggling in, so if you have room next to you, let's just make sure that people can see the open seats. Folks on Zoom, can everybody hear and see? Are we getting a... Yes, all right, I have a thumbs up. Excellent. So we're going to begin today's program, as we begin every program here, by acknowledging that we are gathered today on the homeland of the Séliš people at a place they named Timsumquid. Their example as the original stewards of this land guides our work today. Travelers Rest Connection is committed to respectfully sharing the history and contemporary culture of the indigenous people who lived and traveled through the ancient crossroads on this land. We learn from many indigenous artists, elders, and organizations. We invite you to learn from and support them as well. There are a lot of new faces in the room, so I just want to introduce myself quickly. My name is Molly Stockdale, and I am the Executive Director of Travelers Rest Connection. We are the nonprofit partner of Travelers Rest State Park. I think the easiest way to understand that is we're a friends group. So I always say that my job is to raise funds and friends for this special place. And I'm glad to see so many friends here today. I want to say a quick thank you to some of the friends who made these programs possible. Humanities Montana provided a grant for today's program. And Hasan's visit is also sponsored by the Montana Black Collective Missoula, First Security Bank, and the members of Travelers Rest Connection. We're grateful to MCAT, Missoula's community media resource, for providing a media assistance grant to record this program today. For the folks, especially on Zoom, it's helpful if you keep yourself muted and your video off during the presentation. But if you have questions for our speaker, you can type them in the chat. We'll monitor the chat for questions and any technical difficulties that might arise. And we'll also be asking for questions at the end as well. And I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Hasan Davis brings history alive, giving voice to overlooked heroes of color through his theatrical performances. Hasan's one-man shows are a superb example of experiential, interactive learning that is engaging for adults as well as youth. Hasan has been honored as an Annie E. Casey Foundation Children and Families Fellow, a Council of State Government's Henry Toll Fellow, and a Rockefeller Foundation Next Generation Leadership Fellow. Hasan is a GED recipient, but he earned his bachelor's degree from Berea College and a law degree from the University of Kentucky College of Law. He lives in Berea, Kentucky with his wife, Tracy Gentry, and their children, Malcolm and Christopher, although Christopher actually is living in South Dakota right now. We had a long conversation about that. I would like to just remind everybody to please turn off your ringers on your phones. We're going to step back now into the 19th century with York.
We have been away from the eyes of the whole world almost 3 years. Thousands of miles away from civilization, lifetimes away from the madness all them civilized men call slavery. There was me, a young Shoshone woman named Sacagawea, Captain Lewis, Captain Clark, and about 2 dozen what I call volunteer patriots. Now our mission seemed simple enough. All we had to do was cut a path through the savage Northwest Territories, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, cross 4,000 miles of the highest mountains and fastest rivers any American ever seen before. President Thomas Jefferson called us his men of discovery. And every day we live is a day we all prepared to die, just by the word of the president. We left St. Louis a small army of men. 3 years later returned more like a band of brothers. Not one day went by every man wasn't tested past his limits. Only way he survived that kind of pain if every man willing to give what the one beside him need to stay alive. Well, winter done set in hard on us. Talk around camp was if our luck didn't change, might be looking at starvation soon. One day, Captain Lewis called me up, says, "York, I want you to go out there, try your gift for hunting. See what relief you can bring to us." Now, I took that request just like an order, gathered up my rifle, started out early. Only been gone about an hour or so before I come across some fresh tracks. Looked kind of like bear tracks to me. Now, I don't know how many of y'all ever tried bringing down a bear before, so let me just tell you, anything a man goes to with half a heart, anything a man goes to with a whole mind, either, you ask me, but we was desperate. I was determined to show Captain Lewis that his faith in me was well placed. I figured since the wind was blowing in my face, been doing so all morning, I might could follow them tracks out of ways, I'd obey, even knowing I was coming. If I was to catch up to him, we just have to see what was what. So I followed them tracks out a mile or so, come over a hill, and there he was, way off in the distance, a slow-moving giant of a bear. By that time, I already made up my mind, and folks that know tell you, once York make up his mind, ain't nothing in this world set to change it. Found a good-sized tree, laid out my shot and powder, and I showed him my rifle. I was adjusting for the long range of the shot, about to pull up a little more, account for the wind, been blowing in my face all morning. About that time, I realized wind wasn't blowing in my face no more. Mostly kind of old bear throwing his nose in the air, letting out a growl that shook the tree beside me. I knew my time for thinking was done. Boom! That first shot fell between the shoulders. Old bear let out a growl, spun on his hinds, come charging back at me, all claws and fangs. So I ducked back behind the tree and started to reload, praying the whole time. Didn't make my first mistake with a rifle right there, because it was going to be my last mistake with a rifle. Now, it seemed like it took me about an hour to get that next shot loaded. Whole time I think old bear must be breathing straight down the back of my neck, and I can't hear nothing. Kind of my heart beating so fast and loud, sounding like drums pounding my ears. Somehow I got that next shot loaded. Come around the tree, I was pulling the trigger before I even sighted up. Boom! Now that second shot hit him in the arm. Didn't even slow him down. I know there wasn't going to be no third shot, so I lowered my rifle, stepped out of the smoke to the right side of the tree, and I pulled my axe and my knife, and I waited for him. Well, see, I waited because it don't make no sense. A man trying to outrun a wounded, angry bear, all it's going to do get you cut down from behind. I figured my best chance, maybe my onlyest chance, is to stand my ground and face him like a man. So I waited for him. I said a quick prayer for my wife and family back in Louisville. I said 2, maybe 3 longer prayers for myself, mind you, and I waited. Boom, boom, about that time a door report come from my left side. Turns out Captain Clark gets in a couple boys to check on my success, and I was so glad he did. Both shots caught old bear square in the chest. And by that time, must have been nothing but pain and rage from that great big body of his. That finally got on him less than 10 paces. I stood waiting. It took a second to gather my wits. I thanked them boys for their good time, and I thanked them again for their better shooting. And we set to skinning and cleaning as much of that bear as we could, as fast as we could, because with all that smoke and noise, with all that blood, we feared the wolves might be coming. That's the last place man wants to be when the wolves come. So we pack as much meat as we can carry and head for camp. Arrived like conquering heroes. And that night we feasted like kings, and the laughter, absent from our fires for weeks, slowly returned as hard, cold men began to speak more fondly of home and family and dreams. And that night, thousands of miles away from this civilization on hard, cold ground, I slept the sleep of the dead. I dreamed of my wife and family back in Louisville. I praised to God. I says, please, can't you just let me see her face one more time, these old eyes of mine, before you go tear me out of this here world of yours? My name is York. Just York. It is the name my daddy carried before me. I was born a slave. No, I was born to be a slave, to be the property of another man. And that is the shame my daddy carried before me. But I have seen a world few white men might ever dream of. I have climbed the top of snow-capped mountains, swum rivers so swift the buffalo lose their foot, watched whales dance across the cool waters of 2 oceans, and I have walked amongst the people those Americans you call Indian have welcomed me into their land with open arms, like some long-lost brother. And now, I ask you to hear of the things that I have seen, so that when I am gone from here, my name, my voice, my story does not die with me, for that is the way of the people. It is the only thing I have left to give. Now, the hardest part for me was always the not knowing. So many times before, Master Clark and I would go on adventures, sometimes leaving home for months at a stretch, always with the understanding we'd be coming back. Once we sailed from New Orleans all the way around New England. It took us 9 months at sea. As soon as we touched ground, we rode hard for home. there's something different about this mission of discovery. Everybody talking about where we going and what we doing. Ain't nobody said a word about when we coming home. That concerned me. That and the fact, well, nobody ever asked if I wanted to be part of the president's mission of discovery. No one asked if I wanted to lay my life down for this nation here because I was just a slave. Funny thing is, if I was a free man, I could not have volunteered to lay my life down for the president. Since I'm just another man's slave, I guess nobody cared to ask. Now, once we cross over the Missouri River, well, for me, it's like crossing over the River Jordan. Found myself the other side, a changed man. See, the Indians we met, many had seen or at least heard of a white man before, but they ain't seen nobody like me. Started to give me names like Black Indian or Big Medicine. Some even said that I was a gift straight from God. I kind of like the way them Indians was thinking out there. Now, we set our second winter camp at the Mandan village. Called it Fort Mandan. It's where we met Chicago and her husband, Charbonneau. Now, mind you, we called him her husband. All told, heard how this young Indian girl was told from her family she was a child. How this old French man, Charbonneau, bought her in trade from the Hidatsa Indians, make her his wife. She was great with child when we met him. Give birth to little Pomp over the winter. I sit outside the lodge waiting for him to come to the world. When I hear them crying, I told Captain Clark, I says, well, Captain Clark, now as long as that girl and that baby with us, you ain't got to worry for them. Ever it take to keep them safe, sir, I'm prepared to give it, even if that costs my life. And sure as I'm standing here today, you best believe I kept them safe. Now that same winter, we met old One Eye, chief of the Hidatsa Indians. He refused to come visit for a long time, kind of the Hidatsa Indians had supported the British during that Revolutionary War. We all know how that turned out for him. Anyway, they say that word of the black man finally got to old One Eye. He couldn't take it no more, had to come see what everybody else been talking about. So he come to fort demanding to see me. Well, I stood there before him. The first thing he did was to lick his thumb good, start to rub as hard as he could, thinking he might take the black right off this man. He said he was afraid it might be another trick by the white man. He just had to be sure. But when it didn't come off, well, he started to look at me different, like I am somebody special. And then I did what I always did with a new chief of tribe. I stripped my shirt down bare. I stood there before him, arms out far as I could hold them. I let two, sometimes I let three Indian warriors get up in each hand, and I stepped back and pick them up till all their feet was off the ground. And let me tell you something. Well, they ain't never seen a man that powerful before. They said a man like that. They said this black man right here had to be touched by God. And Captain Clark was quick to agree with him. He says, well, surely you ought to respect a man with that kind of power, he says. But if you respect this man, then you must respect the white man, because for the white man come along, this York, his kind, they weren't nothing but savage animals. And the white man captured him. And the white man tamed him. The white man made him a slave. If you're going to respect all of that power, and you should, ain't you got to respect a man can take that kind of power and make a slave? And sometimes Captain Lewis might fire the air gun once or twice, get all the attention back on him. That's when they started explaining to them Indians how they're going to be part of a new tribe now called the United States. How they got a new chief and great father we call president, how they have a duty to protect the president's warriors in their lands or suffer for it. Now, I don't know how many times I heard them tell one chief or another tribe that story before I understood what they were saying. They tell them Indians, they get to be American. Not like y'all American, they get to be more colored American. And by my figuring, with the misery I call life, it ain't got room for more souls. I wished I could have made myself so ferocious I could have scared them all away, or at least warned them. But I don't speak the languages. So sometimes all I could do was excuse myself from the lodge. I go out into the cold night air, and the little Indian children always follow right behind. They say they know a gift like this can't stay one place forever, so they won't be close as they can till God decides to send him on his way. Sometime I asked God, wonder he might forgive this man what he couldn't do for the innocent children. We Well, we stayed with the man down till the ice started to break on the lakes. Once the geese started flying north, captain said it's time for us to make our push for the Rock Mountain. Now, the man didn't say, any man got hope of making them mountains need three things: good horses, better supplies, and a man that knows the way. They say the Shoshone Indians best place for all three. So our mission changed. Before we can go to the mountain, we got to find the Shoshone people. We got to find the Snake Indians. Now, for the next few weeks moving upriver, we had no contact at all. Finally, Captain Clark says, well, maybe our small detail of men working in away from the water have better luck. So he draws the small detail he trusts to go with him. You best believe my name is on that list, because he know. And the step he can take, I ain't prepared to follow. So we walk 5 days, almost 75 miles. By the end, our boots are torn through and our feet bloodied. Had to stop and wait for the others to catch up. When they did, well, Captain Lewis drew a fresh detail of men, and they proceeded on. A few days later, we got word they finally met up with the Shoshone. We to get there fast as we can on account of there's a lot of concern, a lot of agitation. With this many armed white men so far in the Indian country, making everybody nervous. Now, they told him we traveled with an Indian girl and her baby, and that set him at ease some. Figure no self-respecting man going to go to war, not with women and children. But they say that word of the black man already made itself upriver. They all just standing around waiting to see what everybody else been talking about. So when I step out of the boat, they gather around me like the others, and Captain Lewis called Sacagawea over to translate words, since he speak the language, instead of all that hand-talking Juilliard so good at. Now, that's when we got our real surprise. Remember I told y'all this girl was told her family she was young? This old Frenchman, Charbonneau, bought her in trade, decided to make her his wife. Well, she says she don't remember much about being a child. But what she do remember, her big brother, his name, Kamehameha. Now, it turns out the man these Shoshone called chief now carried that same name. Without even trying to, we found a way to bring a family back together. I don't know about where you come from, but in my life, ever to change the slavery, tear family apart, ain't nothing short of dying going to make it whole. This was God working. Made it easy to trade for supplies and horses. Kamehameha was so pleased, he give us his best tracker. Old man, he say, know them mountains like nobody living. Now, the old man's name was awful hard to pronounce. Captain Lewis says, because civilized tongues were meant to speak such savage words. Just call that old man Toby and be done with it, he says. Now, I was of the mind. Well, see, I figure any man gonna look me in the face, make a promise to carry me through the mountains we're looking at right here, say you're gonna get me all the other side alive. I say a man like that ought to be called. Ever in the world he tell you to call him. But nobody asked what I was thinking. And I went up for volunteering, so old Toby lead us into the Bitterroot. Before we got in good, a storm coming out of nowhere dropped 10 hard inches of snow. We lost our path, started throwing packs and losing animals. It got so bad, we had to put down 2 colts, shot them dead, and we ate them whole. But there was no doubt we were dying. Finally, Captain Clark says, maybe a small detail of men push hard as they can against us in the mountain, break way to the other side. We can gather whatever we can gather, come back for the rest. It might be our only chance, he said. So when he called the name of the 5 or 6 men he counted on for this most important mission, you best believe my name was on that list, because he knew. Only way we ain't making this here mountain is if this heart of mine stop beating against them rocks and we push hard as we can against that mountain. They finally break way to the other side, and the Nez Perce Indians. It was kind enough to trade us for root, berries, and salmon. We gathered everything we can carry and went back in for our friends. Once we make it out the other side, stayed with the Nez Perce several weeks. It took a few days just to feel the bones in our bodies again. We so cold. While we healed up, we made new canoes. And the Indians taught us how to fire boats out. Now, always before a man wanted a canoe, you take a big tree trunk, you put the axe to it, and you carve yourself a boat. But they taught us how to fire. Take that same trunk, you lay red-hot coals across, and you burn away one layer at a time. So when you're done, you got a boat run smooth in the water. Ain't got no leaks. You got a good craft. The Indians taught us that and a lot more. They keep us alive out there. Once we all healed up, the captain said it's time for us to make our run for the ocean. We left our horses and a few supplies with the Nez Perce on the promise of returning, and we proceeded on. Next few months was much of the same: new chiefs, new tribes, telling them about the United States and about the president. Captain Clark even named a group of islands after me. He called it York's 8 Islands. Ain't that got a good sound to it? And then one day we come down to Columbia, and the captain started shouting, "Ocean in view." Ocean! We had made it to the Pacific Ocean. 4,000 miles of high mountains and fast rivers, all that way, all that suffering and pain. You know, we only lost one man. He was a good man. His name was Sergeant Charles Floyd. Come to us up out of Kentucky. Growed up in Louisville, but his family say the God they know and love ain't never intend one man owning soul of another man. They want no part of a state going to make that the law, so they moved cross river to Indiana, to free country. I was with Sergeant Floyd when he died. Did all I could to make him comfortable, and I sat and I cried with him. Well, I cried for all the folk might never know one true God-loving man, counting him early past in this world. But we made it to the ocean, so we had plenty of reason to celebrate. Now, the thing we had to do at station camp was to decide our last winter court. And the captain decided they're going to put it to a vote, which side of the river we're going to settle. One being good for building and supplies, the other good for hunting. And they went around one man after the other saying what he thought it ought to be. And they get to me. And everybody looking like I'm supposed to say something here. Now, y'all know better than I. Law of this nation say a Negro man ain't got the right, not under the Constitution, not under God, to raise his hand upside a white man. But Captain Clark say, it took every man, his blood, his sweat, his whole heart to get us this far on the most important mission for a nation of men. The way I see it, he says, means every man has earned the right to say where we go from here. York, he said, the time has come for you to vote. So I voted. Right there beside all them white men, I put my word up and it counted for something. Now, some say, maybe that make me the first Negro man in this whole country vote legal side of white man. I don't know if that's true, but I know it felt good. I know it felt right. So we decided to settle the south side of the river and set to build in Fort Clatsop. For the next few days, I was putting my back into it. Some days I was hauling trees as big around as my body all by myself. I want to show all them men how much I deserved that vote. Couldn't leave no room for question. Captain Clark says I was working so hard I fatigued my body. Was laid up a few days, but I proved my point. Once camp was set, we started making regular journeys down to the ocean, sometimes just to bring water back to boil down for salt, something to put on that awful food we've been eating for 3 years. Then some days I sit at that water for hours, watching the whales. Y'all ever seen the whale before? Well, have you? The way they move across the water so smooth you can hardly see him there. Then bring that great big body all the way out, and you can see just how great he is before he dive down, disappear all together. I would sit at that water for hours watching them whales, trying to imagine in my heart and my head what it'd be like if a man carried that kind of freedom. If a man could run as far as he want to run. Nobody tell him it's time to come back or you ain't got a right to be there just because the color of your skin. I couldn't even see what that kind of freedom looked like. One day, Captain Clark come through, says, y'all, it's about time for us to put our mind back on civilization. Our mission for the president is complete. Our success will be going home soon. Now, mind you, them the words I've been waiting to hear since before we left St. Louis. Me, the only man out here away from the world, got a wife and family back home, maybe to give them up for dead. I couldn't wait to get home. One night, Captain Lewis called us all around the fire, say he'd been thinking about what he might tell the president of these United States about his brave men of discovery, about these men that sacrificed more than any volunteer or to give his nation, about these heroes that made a president's dream come alive. And he starts to call out the names one after the other, like he might present them to the president. After every name, there'd be a hoop here, a howl over there, and Chris, I started up with the fiddle, and we was having a good time. We was having so much fun. Maybe nobody else noticed. I mean, besides me, it don't seem like nobody noticed. Time he finished listing out the name of them brave men, sacrificed more than any volunteer or to give his nation. But by the time he finished listing out the name of them heroes, make a president's dream come alive. My name wasn't on that list. Maybe that's when it come clear what it is. Captain Clark says, he says, York, it's time for us to put our mind back on civilization. He's saying, New York, it's time for us to put our mind back on walking 3 steps behind, not looking the white man in the eye as you pass him on the road. New York, it's time for us to put our mind back on not speaking unless somebody command you to speak. It's time for us to put our mind back in chains, boy, because we're going home now. Back to civilization. Well, sure, folk ask me all the time, if you had it so good out there, them Indians treating you like God and everything, why would a man come back to living like this? Well, I had my reasons. My wife, my life. See, man can't run away pretending he's free. He ain't got the ones he loves beside him, because that ain't no freedom. Besides, I figure all we need to do is make it home, and Master Clark gonna give me my freedom. Before we left on this mission for the president, Master Clark freed Ben. Went on and on about, seeing as how servitude for life is against God's will and the natural order of mankind itself, I'll be giving Ben his freedom for faithful service in my house and my kin. Well, Ben's a good boy. Been with us a while. But he ain't like me. I've been with Master Clark my whole life. More than 30 years, I done stood right by his side out one day of failing. I think after the last 3 years, we done had. All we got to do is make it home, and he's going to make me a free man. I couldn't wait to get home. Starting back upriver, making such good time like we walking on water. Every tribe we get to, we trade boats for horses the faster we can travel. Time we get back to the Nez Perce, Cam Lewis ordered us trade everything we don't need for root, he said. I don't know if y'all ever had root before. Well, it ain't best tasting thing in the world. Might be the worst thing I ever put in my mouth, and that's saying a lot after dog and bear and all that, but we know it'll keep a man alive. And all we got to do is survive this here mountain one more time, and we going home. Captain Lewis even cut the buttons off his uniform, give them to me to trade. All told, we come back with 20 bushels of root, more than any man ever want to eat his whole life. We started back past that mountain, past the Shoshone and the Arikara and the Mandan, the Hidatsa, the Oto, the Sioux, all the way back into St. Louis. Time we get to St. Louis, looked like a parade started up. Folk lined the road as far as I could see. Most of them say they give us up for dead years ago. And for a few days, they stopped me on the road. Asked me about the president's mission of discovery. Asked me about the great things we've seen, the great Indians we met. And I went back to my duties. I tried to smile. I tried to not look a white man in the eyes. I passed him on the road, but it was so hard to lower my head again. Finally, Captain Clark says it's time for us to go on Washington City, report to the president. Before that, we stopped in Louisville, and when we get home, I sent the word out when the work day's through and all the chores are done. Everybody's come around. If it take all night, best prepared to sit all night so I can tell them everything I remember about the last 3 years. And I told them everything. Now, mind you, most they couldn't even believe I told them anyway because they need to know. And then from there, we went on to Washington City, and every man get 320 acres of good farmland for his hard work. Every man double duty pay and gold coin for a sacrifice. Every man the appreciation of an entire nation making the president's dream come alive. I was in the slave quarters waiting to be called before the president. And it's a call that never came. For long, it was time to go on back to Louisville. Master Clark said he'd been promoted to general. Chief Indian agent for the entire nation now, say carry out his duties, going to be moving his house to St. Louis permanent. Say he can't see himself going about new service in a strange land out of his most prized possession, out of his favorite slave right there beside him. So I asked him, I say, Master Clark, if we move into St. Louis for good, then what about my wife? What about my family? He returned my question with a question. He said, well, what about him? I didn't give you a lawful order. I expect you to follow without question. It's time for you to be done with that wife of yours, he said. I order you to be done with that wife of yours. When we get to St. Louis, I'll secure a new wife for you there. Now, I couldn't believe them words coming out of his mouth like that. See, all the time we out there away from the world, him going on and on about Miss Julia Hancock of Virginia, how he can't wait to get back to his civilization, take her hand, because he can't see himself growing old out the woman he loved right there beside him. So I thought that meant he knew how A man needs somebody he can run home to when the world been standing on his back all day. A shoulder that he can cry on if he got to. Somebody tell him, as long as you know somebody love you, tomorrow got to be better than today. I thought he knew what it was for a man to give his heart away. And then he ordered me to be done with my wife like she's some stray dog I found on the side of the road. When we get home, I pack up the house. Master Clark went by boat and I took the slaves and wagons overland to St. Louis. We got there, I went to Master Clark. I say, Master Clark, it seems to me you got lots of business interests to attend to in Louisville. Since I done took care of your business most of our life together, I reckon I'm the best man for that job. You could send me on back to Louisville, handle all your business, put me right close to my family. Seemed like a good plan. Now he said he can see what I'm getting at. Ain't gonna stand for much of that talk from me, but he'd allow me back to Louisville 4 or 5 weeks to finish up his business, sell his boat back for St. Louis. When you return, he says, my expectations for you to be done with that wife of yours and set to get back to your duties as a loyal, obedient slave in my house. 4 or 5 weeks for a man to just throw his heart away. Well, about 5 months later, he sent word to his brother. I must have misunderstood his orders because I've been gone about 4 months too long. What's something you need to know about that? Well, there wasn't no misunderstanding. Sometimes, man got to do what's right by him and his God instead of what another man tell him. But I did know if I didn't sell for St. Louis directly, it'd be the devil to pay. Oh, he told me before, he showed me what it's like to be a real slave. He said he showed me down in New Orleans. They say you find yourself a slave down in New Orleans, you ain't ever seen nothing you love again the rest of your short, painful life. They got ways down there of crushing a man's soul and grind his bones into the earth. I done seen it myself. Ain't no place a man want to be. So I knew I had to sail before I push off. It's my wife, you see. She come down the water and see me. She'd say the man that she called master done decided to move his house further south in the slave country. She'd say, well, then, if you plan on selling that boat back for St. Louis, I reckon you best turn on around here. Turn around, y'all can take one last long look at your wife, because chances is you ain't never gonna see this face of mine again. Now, them few words, they almost did what the hardest 3 years of my whole life couldn't do. Almost stopped this heart beating dead in my chest, but I knew if I did not sail, I was gonna lose everything I ever loved. I didn't have a choice. Slaves don't have choices. So I sailed. By the time I got to St. Louis, I made up my mind. Folks that know tell you, once York make up his mind, well, ain't nothing in this world set to change it. I went back to Master Clark. I say, Master Clark, since we've been together our whole life, more than 30 years, me standing right by your side, I one day of failing. We as little boys, we used to wrestle together, hunt, fish, ride horses all day long up and down the rivers. We was older, I went about my duties with respect. You ain't never have to question my loyalty to you or your kin. Ever you fell down, I picked you up. Ever you were sick, I made you better. If somebody was to threaten your life, don't you know I would slay a man with these bare hands? Or lay my own life down if it see you 1 second safe. And for 3 years, me and you stood side by side against the whole world. And I didn't get 1 acre of good farmland for it. Nobody dropped 1 gold coin in my pocket. And President Thomas Jefferson, well, still don't know my name. But Master Clark, you're the onlyest man in the world, the power to give me what I need right now. Billy, make me a free man. Save my family. You know, I thought Master Clark gonna hurt himself. Hard as he laughing, what is I got to say? He say he think it funny. Me believing any service I done rendered my whole life, more than 30 years by his side, is more than what a slave does for his rightful master under God. Said if he was ever see such immense service, he'd be rewarded, but it ain't come yet. Besides, he said, you are a much too valuable piece of property for a man just let go like that. That's what he said. Much too valuable piece of property for a man to let go. So I figured if it's about my value, sure I could do something about that. I started to agitate, doing things just enough wrong. He knows it's by my choosing. Now he say, see what I'm getting at, ain't gonna stand for much of it. And mind you, I tried to smile. I tried to not look a white man in the eye as I passed him on the road, but I could not lower my head again. So Master Clark had me strapped to the post, and he paid a man good money to beat me until I could not see. Once I healed up, I tried not speaking unless somebody commanded me to speak, but I just couldn't hold my tongue no more. So Master Clark had me locked in the jailhouse. 30 days in that jailhouse. Every one of them days worse than that beating I took. Maybe somewhere in all that he figured whatever broke inside me sure wasn't getting fixed fast enough. So he decided to go on and send me back to Louisville. Now, I don't know what the letter read he sent on to his brother, seeing as I can't read, but I've been guessing at it. I reckon that letter says it's time for York to know what it is to be a real slave. It's time for York to know what it is to have a severe master. It's time for York to know how good his life has been up till now. See, I figure that's what that letter read, because that's the lesson his brother set to teaching me. They hired me out to a man, dressed me in rags, and tossed me in the field. Strapped a big old bull plow across my back, and for 2 years, that old man tried to grind my bones into the earth. And for 2 years, I ain't heard one word from Master Clark. And finally, word come through his nephew. He done decided to go on and give me my freedom. Only been 10, maybe 11 years since we come back on this mission for the president. Most slaves my age don't ever see freedom, but everything I'm fighting to be a free man falls out of my hands. My wife, my whole life is gone. But Master Clark sent me the drives business, running freight from Richmond, Kentucky to Nashville, Tennessee. Well, folk ask all the time, what sense did it make a free man riding headlong into the slave South to do business? Well, I had my reason. I figured somewhere along them roads, somebody done seen or heard tale of that family that's holding my wife. And if this business of mine is worth anything, well, the man might have enough gold in his pocket one day to buy his heart back. But there's things they don't tell you about the slave South. How they got these laws say a free man ain't got the right to associate with a slave kind of. He might be telling that slave what it's like to be free. They might get a sense they deserve the same. Punishment being 90 lashes in jail if you're a lucky one. And those folk you meet on the road seem nice enough. They offer you a warm fire and a good meal, but there are plenty of stories how a man might lay his head down free but wake up in chains, because without them freedom papers you keep right next to your heart, you ain't nothing but a runaway with a good story. I couldn't be with my own. I couldn't trust nobody else. And business wasn't doing too good. I guess it didn't make sense. White man hiring somebody like me ain't good for slaves. See that kind of thing going on. And them that did hire didn't always pay. Well, because the law say a Negro man can't go in the court and swear out against the white man under the Constitution, under God, even if his life depended on it. So my horses started dying. Imagine they being poisoned. And it finally got so bad, I had to hire myself back into hard labor. A whole year contract. I'm done with it now, and I ain't never going back again. Well, sure, I know some things now. I know that I ain't never going to see my wife again. Except every night when I close my eyes and she right there telling me, as long as you know somebody loves you, York, oh, it got to be better than today. And God sure going to take care of his children. But I am not ready to die yet. And I know now that a man cannot live like this. So I come up with a new plan. I figure if I can make it back up to Missouri and out to Indian country, things might could be different. Maybe somewhere out there, a man could walk down the road and people ask you to stop and talk a while. Little children ask you to throw them into the air and catch them with your strong hands because it means that they have been touched by God. Maybe somewhere out there a man could live. Or maybe a man could just die like a man. And I aim to find that place. Oh, I expect to perish in the attempt. Now, before I go, I was hoping y'all could do me a favor. If you don't mind. Where I see it, one day somebody might ask you what you know of Captain Lewis and Captain Clark, or the President's Men of Discovery. And you could tell them. You could tell them that you know a man with skin as dark as night. That you know a black man who walked stride for stride, who suffered pain for pain with the greatest heroes this nation might ever know. You tell them that my name is York. Just York. It is a name my daddy carried before me. And although I was born into change, you tell them that I am not now. No. You tell them that I have never been the property of another man. And I ask you this so that when I am gone from here, my name, my voice, my story does not die here with me. For that is the way of the people. And the sad truth is, these few words are the only things of value that I have left to give. Well, the sun is finally set, my friends. And so, my new journey must begin. Godspeed. Whew. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you. Whew, wait, let me find my glasses.
Need a little bit of water?
Please, thank you. Hey, there you are, okay. Hey, y'all. Great thing about being blind is you don't know who's there. So it's always a full house. But it's good to see all of you all. And thank you for coming out on a chilly day. And traditionally what we do after a presentation is take a little time to see if there might be questions, comments, concerns about the program, about the story, about the history. I can talk about most other things too, so I'm happy to take whatever questions you have. The only rule is you can only speak one at a time.
And I'll just ask you, or I will repeat questions so the folks on Zoom can hear us.
Outstanding.
Okay.
I saw a hand over here, yes.
So, can you tell us a little bit about what happened to York?
What happened to York? Yeah, so there's a couple of stories. So the most popular story, and I guess I should probably first start by saying, I've been doing this since the bicentennial, been doing this since 1998. And during the bicentennial, the National Park and Department of Interior invited me to be York for the bicentennial. And so really along the trails for those 4 or 5 years, having a chance to be in those spaces was pretty amazing to tell this story. And one of the things that came up very often is this story gets pretty perilous about halfway through, and it changes from the story that we all knew. And so, I used to get a lot of, revisionists, the revisionists, people say, you're changing our story. So I want to be really clear. All of that second half of the story, that return, came out of the lost letters of William Clark himself. In the late 1980s, a family in Louisville, and my friend Jim Holmberg, who's a Clark family historian, he tracked me through the whole process, but there was a family who had inherited from William Clark's brother, Jonathan, who was the one that he sent York back to, and his descendants. They finally got to a point where they had all this stuff in this house they were ready to get rid of, and they had somebody come and see what it was, and they found all these trunks full of letters from William Clark to his brother Jonathan that no one had ever seen. And it changed the story dramatically because in those letters he writes, York is being so surly, like he did something important, like he wants his freedom. I know it's that wife that's doing it. I told him to get rid of him. I'm just going to find him a new wife because I don't know what he's doing. And it was like you can see the way his writing is just so angry because it's like he was betrayed by his own hand because everything for York changed on that expedition. Nothing for Clark changed. And so he couldn't understand why they couldn't just go back to the great relationship that they had. And it was apparently a pretty great relationship as far as master-slave relationships go, right? And you put that in context how you need to. But so that was William Clark, sell him down the river if he can't be any good to you because he's no good to me right now the way he is. And so this was, all of that story is William Clark trying to explain to his brother why this relationship that everybody saw as like the relationship had completely fallen apart. But the story of what happened to York, in 1832, Washington Irving, of course, of Legend of Sleepy Hollow fame, interviewed William Clark. In that interview, he asked him, whatever became of your man York? He was like fascinated. Well, what happened to him? And Clark says, well, we got back from the expedition and I freed him. I gave him his great business, running freight from Kentucky to Tennessee. He failed miserably, right? He couldn't get it all done, right? He kind of slipped into that stereotypical, justification for slavery, right? He was dumb, he was lazy. And now you got to understand, 4 years on this expedition, journals kept by all white men who were told implicitly and, very clearly that just by the accident of your birth, you have done nothing special. Just by the accident of your birth, you're automatically better than him. And over 1 million words of text is estimated to be associated with those journals. And not one time did those men who were enculturated into a system that told them everything about you was better without even doing anything, and they still didn't write anything negative about him. Oh, that York, he was late, but they talked about him swimming across the river. They talked about him coming back into Tampa with a full deer on his back. They talked about his impact on the indigenous communities. And so that became very powerful, right? A transition from him being competent and a part of a team that was highly functional, highly motivated, and succeeded where others could not. And all of a sudden, he just couldn't get up early enough, and he was just terrible at business. And we got documents showing that he literally handled most of William Clark's business, most of their life. He was Clark's business manager. But all of a sudden, he's this frail, stereotypical caricature of an inept black slave. And so Clark says, yeah, he fell miserably. I hear that he died of cholera in Tennessee trying to get back to me, wishing he was my slave again. Right? And so for 200 years, that was the story we had. That they did this thing, that Clark was like, all right, York, you did great. I'll see you at Thanksgiving, man. Come on by. And he says, I freed him, but it was at least 10 years from the documentation of William Clark's own letters before he did that, with all of the drama in between. And he said he died. Now, what's interesting is around that same time, I think about 1834, 36, a team of trappers working for one of the fur companies, led by a guy named Zenas Leonard, reports that they encountered a small war tribe of Crow Indians on their way out. That the chief of this war tribe was an old black man who told them in English that he had gone to the ocean with Lewis and Clark. Now they lived with this tribe on the way in and the way out. Now, if you know, right, if we understand this, right, these trackers and trappers were the frontier special forces, right? They were the guys who kept all the good information. Like, no, we messed up with those people over there, so don't go mess with them because they still mad about what the government, right? And so they were the guys with the information. I imagine, and so we've had talk about it could be James Beckwith, it could be Ed Rose, a lot of other people it could have been. But when you think about the age and the fact that they actually described him as an old black man instead of as a young man, which Ed Rose and Beckwith would have been at that time, it gets very interesting. And he told them, and they're like, yeah, that's him. He out there doing good. They witnessed him in battle against the raiding band of Blackfeet Indians. Very detailed description. I'm a lawyer by training, right? Hearsay evidence, right? Somebody saying like, Susie said that Frankie told her that Johnny saw Graham do something. Graham's gonna be home by lunchtime, right? But eyewitness accounts, Susie said she saw Graham do it. Graham's got some explaining to do, right? Like Lucy. But in our way of codifying facts and data, we know that eyewitness accounts, we've decided that eyewitness accounts are the thing that we hold on to. But because of William Clark and his stature, our own historians and our own way of holding information and truth shifts because they call him a credible historical witness. You know, and I'm gonna be really honest. I mean, if I was William Clark and my big brother was the hero of the Revolutionary War, and people ask me about how I lost control of my slave, I would probably want to make sure the story. I'm just talking about human nature, right? When we look at what happened with them in this journey, so we don't know, but Zenas Leonard and his whole team said, we saw him out there, he's doing good. We've encountered lots of the indigenous communities across here, even including the Nez Perce and some of the other communities that say, you know, yeah, he was part of our communities, right? I remember I was I guess it was at Pompey's Pillar doing something during the bicentennial, and I was talking to one of the indigenous leaders there. I started talking, he was like, oh yeah, York's people here, you know, and I kind of stopped. He says, but it's none of your business. Right? He says, this is not a zoo and we don't point people out, but, right? So this ain't, I said, yes, sir, thank you very much, you know? But so we don't know, but there's some speculation. And it could be either way. Interesting thing, we don't know what happened to his wife and family either. There's an assumption that they had children together. A few years ago, I encountered a woman at the Lewis and Clark headquarters. I was doing a show there in Omaha, the National Park headquarters of Lewis and Clark. And a woman came up after me. She says, you know, I saw York's grave. I was like, really? And she said, I was in Natchez, Mississippi. Now, you got to understand that William Clark wrote in his letters to his brother that the family that held York's wife moved to Natchez. All right? And so I was intrigued, at least. When she got back home, she emailed pictures of the cemetery in Natchez, Mississippi, with a headstone that said, York, faithful servant, 1859. Now, I don't think that it was York, but York was named after his father. They called him Old York. And if his wife and her family were taken and all she had left was a baby to name York, to hold that would make perfect sense in Natchez, Mississippi, where Clark said the family went and disappeared from our story. And so I'm intrigued. I'm actually trying to find some dollars to get down there because I called the Historical Society there for like 3 years, starting in COVID, and they just have not picked up the phone, like literally. And so I'm gonna have to just like take a trip down there and wander through. But there's still a story here to live, right? And maybe there's another part of it because, you know, when they sent the kill boat back from the Mandan Nation, one of the things that was unique about it is that again that showed that York was more than just, you know, that slave or the guy that just showed up, was that as Clark was listing out the things they were sending back, York sent back 2 buffalo hides for his wife, right? And the odd thing is, I know a couple of artists way back in the day when I first started this from Mississippi. And when I first started doing this show, they saw it once and they said, you know, there's an old lady back in the country that everybody talks about and that she has these buffalo hides. So there's all these pieces that I'm still trying to gather together that I think might be a whole other story, but I don't know. But so we don't know what happened to York, but we know that there are all these pieces that say that it was more than just an inglorious end, wishing he was back, you know, to where things were simpler and he didn't have to choose for himself. Because those of us who know what it means, I was a soldier. So I know I don't like people telling me what to do. Even when I was good at it, I didn't like it, right? But the idea of him making it out there, unless somebody's got some candid camera footage, right? Some hidden video that says otherwise, I want to believe he made it, because if he did, maybe that means that any of us, as flawed as our life might get, as difficult as it might get, might accidentally wake up one day in a loving community that says, I am so glad God sent you here to be with us, right? And that's something we can hold out for and we can aspire to. And so I hope so. I hope that he found his second best life when he realized he couldn't get to the one that he came back for. Yeah. There's a question here, and I'll come back up here.
What got you initially interested in embracing this story?
That's a great question. So, I'll have to go way back. What got me in, so one of my seminal memories is 3rd grade. And in 3rd grade, we received our first social studies book. And I remember the teacher being so animated when she explained to us that this was the book where our story lived. And she talked about the fact that the heroes that made this, so it was the speech that you get, right? This was the 70s. This was, and I was so excited. And so I started through this book because I am ready for the story of who we, and I'm wearing myself out chapter after chapter, and that's not me, and that's not me. And I finally get to this chapter and the heading, and some of you may remember this because we might be around the same age. There was a heading of one chapter that just said slavery. And the picture was a picture that we all know well of a black man slooped over with his back just scarred with constant whippings. I think Will Smith did a movie about him just a few years ago, right? But it is the picture of slavery. And the caption below the picture simply read, "The American Negro, slave, period." That is a powerful message for an 8-year-old boy. That the only story you ever get is this. And my mama says that shortly after that, I started refusing to stand up in the morning before class and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And that after lunch every day where the teacher would come in and read from the Bible, I started acting up and I would get put out of class. Because at 8 years old, it was really clear the story had been written for me. The saving grace for me was that my mother was able to show me and tell me stories that were counter to that narrative, the single story of who I could be. And so over my childhood, she continued to tell me these stories. And, I navigated the world with ADHD and dyslexia and dysgraphia, but she would make me sit down and do book reports in the summertime, right, before I could go out and act wild. But so those are the things that held me, that I knew that there was more to the story that I needed to find. And so as I navigated school and finally got into college, I got into theater. And it was my saving grace because it was the thing that I knew how to do. Navigating with all those neurodivergence, one thing I know how to do is engage people. And if you know how to build relationship, you can survive anywhere. That's what I learned at a very young age. And so theater was a natural place for me. And once I graduated and went to law school, well, that's just theater, right? I was a top litigator in the law school the day I showed up because I was ready for it. I could convince anybody, anything. And so when I got through all of that, I wanted to get back into theater, but I knew I was never going to be able to do ensemble again. I wasn't going to be able to do Shakespeare on tour because I had have a real job or something. And so I started looking at these historical societies and humanities councils and these Chautauqua series, the living history. And I thought it would be amazing if I could take my acting skill, which, I'd been told that was pretty good, right? I had professional theater folk that said, Hasan, we'll give you one shot in New York or California. You got to figure it out, but we'll get you in a door and see what you can do with it. But then I got distracted by law school because somebody said, well, yeah, you can do that, but you can't do something hard. That's a whole other story. But these stories, being able to entertain and bring people along in the story, and this is what I love. Right? I want to tell stories that draw you into it so deeply that you have to work to get out of it at the end. And for them to be real stories, right? Not just something made up, but a real story that we can connect to and we can have conversation around and it can inform us. That became so powerful to me. And so my first story was the story of a Civil War soldier named Angus Burley. And as I was touring that nationally, somebody said, you know what, Lewis and Clark Bicentennial's coming up in a few years and you should think about doing something like that because you're really good at this. And I was like, thank you, and I do think I'm really good, but I don't think anybody's gonna buy me being Lewis or Clark, right? I'm not that good, right? And they were like, no. There's this guy, York, and I'll be honest with you, I was totally embarrassed that I consider myself a student of history, and I had no idea who this guy was. And so I said, I'll at least do my due diligence. So I started researching, and the first pieces of research, I'll be honest, were, you kind of get that fluff. It's kind of like Harlequin romance novels, right? Or heroes of the frontier. And whenever you tell those big stories, you got to have steamy stuff in there, but you can't have your heroes doing that if all the women there are Indian or something, right? And so a lot of that first stuff was that real. We've all heard, oh yeah, actually one historian came up to me and says, oh, York, the Indian girls loved him. And I was like, I expect that from somebody who's just kind of got the footnotes. But this guy was a historian about to sit on a panel with me. And it seeped that deep when we have this caricature of people. And so at first I was like, yeah, no, I'm not interested in telling that story. But then, like I said, I started reading the journals. And I started realizing that 1 million words written by men who believed absolutely that they were better just because of their birth and not anything they had done since then. And they could not find something bad to say. The absence of that made the story powerful. Then when I saw the letters that William Clark wrote with his own hands, I said, this is the story that has to be told 200 years later. And so then I started digging into it, and with the help of a historian, I started writing it, and it became, it has been an adventure for me for the last 25 years, but it's been so powerful because I've seen and felt and had the opportunity to engage audiences in a way that gets us past this intellectual thing that we've all been trained to do, right? Because it takes us straight to here where we see people, and when we can see people and people's struggle align with ours, then we can start to have compassion and empathy and start to sense what it might be if we shifted a little bit, right? And we can see, I always say it was never about taking William Clark and Meriwether Lewis down off the pedestal of heroship. It was about showing us we have more room up on that top shelf, and that there's so many more ways. Think about it. At the edge of the world, when nobody was watching, the captain said, everybody gets to say what happens next. Now, I'm going to tell you why that's important. These two were affluent aristocracy. They were rich and they had money, right? This wasn't every white man to get to vote, right? White men who owned land and had property and power got to vote. But these men, instead of saying, let's get all of our buddies that went to school with us, they said, no, we want to get the blacksmith, the wheelwright, the hunter, right? We want all of those guys that know how to do the work, the real workers, to be with us. We had these two officers. First, Meriwether Lewis was the one that President Jefferson said, do. I want you to do it, because they were cousins, and he was his attaché. But Lewis was like, I feel pretty confident, but people don't like me. That's just Meriwether Lewis. He didn't have no personality. He says, but I served under this guy, right? George Rogers Clark's baby brother, William, and everybody loves him, right? He's a redhead. He's just like life of the party. I think two of us together with my intellect and my ability to do these things and his charisma, we can move the world. And so instead of being the leader, right, in the army, they said, no, we're going to be co-leaders. Very different. First that, and then they had these enlisted men. And then you had a black man, an Indian woman, about a dozen French and Indian boatmen from different tribes. This ragtag group that would not have been on anybody's expedition list, right? Historically, expeditions were the 8th son of some noble who's never going to inherit anything. So they got all their buddies that went to school with who were never going to be the ones in charge and say, let's go do something amazing so people remember us. And the story ends, and they were never heard from again, right? Because they go out into the world with the same skill set, the same language barriers, the same responses and reactions to different stimuli, and so they hit something totally foreign, and it crushes them. But because they had this diversity, when they encountered the Sioux, and the Sioux were not impressed with them at all. Literally not impressed. Like every time they say, we're here, we've been trading up and down the roads for 500 years. Oh, well, we got this great stuff. Oh, we had that stuff like 3 years ago. They were like not impressed. And one of the things that was amazing about it is there was a woman who had married into the Sioux Nation from the Omaha Nation. And Pierre Cruzat, the fiddler, was half Omaha, and he spoke Omaha. And after they did the formal, we're from the government, this is our space now, she came to him because many of the women and children had been taken in a raid recently. And so the captains gave Cruzat permission to go and visit with them, to comfort them, to take them some things. And when he was there, one of the women said, hey, brother, I just need to let you know, they like your horses a lot more than they like you. And the plan is, only one of you is going to still be here in the morning. Do what you got to do. So Cruzat was able to take that in Omaha and go back to Labiche in French and say, Labiche, you got to tell the captain we got to get out of here. And Labiche was able to go and translate to the captain and say, Capitan, we got to go right now. Make whatever diplomatic excuses you need to make, but we can't be here. So because they had that diversity that would not have normally been there, they escaped, right? because they had Sacagawea, many of the nations they met said, well, they're not hostile because they got a woman and a baby with them. Let them in. Let's hear what they got to say. One of the elders of the Nez Perce pulled me aside at one of the signature events, pulled me aside, said, you need to come with me. I never met this man. White hair down to here. He said, come over here, away from the cameras. I said, yes, sir. And the guy over, he says, if you're going to tell this man's story, you need to make sure you get it right. Now, like I said, I don't know this man, but he was pretty clear to me. I said, yes, sir. He says, so what you need to understand is before they came through the mountain with Otobi, we knew they were coming for weeks because he didn't take them the straight way. He say, and we had already made a plan. Everybody dies, bury the bodies, go about our business. But when they came through that first group, that black man was with them. In our culture, he said, the only people that have the right to paint their skin black are people in deep mourning or who are to be greatly celebrated for some great deed. Either way, you pay attention to them. So because he was with the first group that came through, we decided to listen. The only reason there is a Lewis and Clark story is because he was in that first group. And if you're going to tell this story, you need to make sure you tell his story with the pride that it deserves. And all I could say was, yes, sir. And so I want you, but see, think about that, right? Because they did, and I'm going to be really clear. I mean, I don't care what the conversation outside of here is about, what it means to be diverse. But what it means is having the right skills in the right place at the right time, the right people for the right job in the moment. And because they did have that, they became and created what we have now, right? That vote at the end was a nod to William Clark saying, everybody did this, even though none of you count except for me and Meriwether back at the house. None of you count, right? It wasn't just the black people or the Indian. None of you count at home. But here, you are the reason we have done something great for a nation. And you get to say what happens next. It would be another 60 years before the 13th Amendment was ratified. It'd be another 100 years before the women's suffrage movement captured the vote for women. It'd be 120 years before Native Americans were considered to be American citizens. But right there at the edge of the world, looking around, they said the right thing to do was to make sure that everybody that got us here decides what we do next. Now, the only sad part when I talk about that leadership story, and I do leadership training for executives across the country and around the world, the only piece of that story where I see the failures when they got back, they were cowed back into telling the story that they did it alone. I mean, and that was the piece. And it wasn't anything unusual. It wasn't anything that wasn't happening in other places. But the story itself, and we know the story because they captured it in a way for us to see it, so it's not a debate, it's clarity. They sat there and for a moment, they lived the Declaration with such clarity and full color, and we've been capturing and chasing that ever since. So part of the reason I tell this story is because I want to continue to be inspired by the idea that it's not a new story that we're after. This is the first story. We're just trying to finally get back to it, and it takes courageous people, just like it did then, to acknowledge the work that we still have to do. Now, I'm gonna get down off my box because I get stuck up there sometimes. I saw another hand. I may have answered the question. I thought there was a hand. I may have answered the question. Yes, sir.
Did you ever have a relationship with Captain Lewis?
It's interesting. No, beyond the expedition, but there is a lot of suggestion in the historical text as Meriwether Lewis was kind of spiraling in his own mental health issues afterwards, and eventually, as the debate goes, whether he killed himself or not, but most historians finally accepted that he did. But one of the stories that is pretty powerful is that William Clark actually sought counsel from Lewis when he was so frustrated with York, and the reason he didn't sell him off right away and continued to kind of deal with that is that Lewis was like, Bill, he did actually go with us, right? I mean, he's not like making stuff up. He was right there. And so a lot of people say that Meriwether Lewis's counsel, which William Clark valued highly, was part of the reason he didn't he didn't take a drastic hard cut, right? That he really, because he was kind of taking him out of his emotion of just feeling betrayed to say no, but I mean, he really, and so there is a lot of folk that say that was part of the equation that kept this from being one of those really tragic stories. Well, I mean, it's tragic in a lot of ways, but there not being that violent, tragic story that so often happened. That he was a part of that, helping William Clark recognize that and accept that there's some truth to it, even though it still hurt.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes. Last one?
Yeah.
Okay.
You are dressed as York at what point in the journey? How does
Yeah.
what you're wearing connect to where you are?
Thank you. And I'm dressing him after with an intention of going back. And so a lot of this is just nods to the adventure overall. The frock coat is like the frock coat you'll see in many places. Most of the times you'll see it and it's white. White linen, but my costumer, did this amazing technique, there's an old technique called tea dyeing. And so she actually dyed it. And believe it or not, this is the original coat. I've had this coat for 27 years now, right? And she made it for me when I first started. And so we got it from a costumer or an outfitter that does period stuff, just the basic piece. And then she frilled it out, which is a technique that it takes a long time. It comes. Yeah, well, she did a lot of work on it. The bead work she modeled after common Blackfeet design, and one of the things that she told me about it was that in the beadwork tradition, there are intentional flaws in every design, because the only thing perfect in the world is God. Since we're not perfect, let's go ahead and get that out the way so we don't have to stress over it, right? And so the necklace was actually gifted to me by another historian early. I used to have this one bear claw, and he was like, "Yeah, that's not a York necklace." And so he showed up at one of the signature events with this. And so these are replica bear claws, grizzly claws, because there are still a lot of folks poaching grizzlies for their claws. But the red and the blue and white beads are trade beads, right, which have been used very often. And this is a replica of the coin, the Lewis and Clark peace coin that they gave to the leaders that they appointed to in the tribes. And so this is a nod to kind of all of those things. That was amazing. This pouch was gifted to me from a mountain man up at Fort Union doing one of the rendezvous. After seeing my performance, he carried this pouch for 20 years, and immediately after I got off stage, he said, "I think this is yours. I've been saving it for you." And he gave it to me. And the rest, the leggings are hide. If you see a lot of the pictures of the captains early on, they have their spats, in their uniforms, keep dust out, keep things from going up your legs. York didn't have those things, and so the next common thing would be to take deer hide and kind of create your own to keep things from crawling up your pants leg, things like that. The boots are Brogaines. You get them, they're no left or right. You have to break them in. That's some work. And so hand-stitched leather boots. So all of this is period close, either before or after, and just kind of a sense of York taking in all of his experience and thinking about, as he moves forward, what that's going to be like. And so for me, that was, and Mary and my costumer is really one that helped me kind of envision and think about what that would look like. And yeah, well, thank you for that. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today. Thanks for coming out. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
I did just want to mention for everybody, there are some of Hasan's books, his picture book, The Journey of York for Children, but also some of his other books. Please stop back and see his son Malcolm is back there to sell books. And Hasan will sign them.
I'll be around.
We'll give him a minute to catch his breath.
Yeah.
We will be back here next week with Sally Thompson, and she's going to be talking about her 2 new books, Disturbing Sleeping Buffalo, and I want to get the name wrong, but the second book is about Chief Shiloh and Father Rivali, and our neighbors down in Stevensville. So please come back. Black robes in Coyote's world.
There you go.
All right, see you next week, everybody.
Thank you all.